All right, we're live.
All right, I'll call the Planning Committee meeting to order. Welcome everybody to a virtual Planning Committee meeting on a beautiful spring evening in Barrie. Unfortunately, though, we are not together because of COVID-19, and due to those distancing measures, Planning Committee is continuing to practice physical distancing. All members of council, executive management, and the city clerk are participating via video conference. Members of the senior leadership team who have reports on tonight's agenda are not visible, but they are here to answer questions as we deliberate their reports a little later in the agenda. I will run through a quick consent agenda to see which matters members of committee would like to hold for discussion. I'll read out the title associated with the recommended motions. If the item is not held, the motion printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent, and the recommendation will go forward to City Council. And just to note, the recommendations from tonight's Planning Committee will be going forward to City Council on Monday, April 12th, and that is because of the Easter break. Okay, on the consent agenda then, we have a few staff reports. The first one is with regards to proposed amendments to our community improvement plan. No holds on that. That is approved on consent by Planning Committee. The next item is an application for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 301099 Ontario Inc., Previn Court Homes. This is for 180 and 190 Ferndale Drive North, 59 and 61 Sprull, and part of Block 183 Plan 51M 751, Ward 5.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Thompson. The remaining matter, can somebody just hold this report as well?
I'll hold the draft of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. So we'll hold that because we will be having a presentation on this one. That's the Affordable Housing Monitoring Report. And that presentation will occur after the public meeting, which we will now move on with. We have one public meeting on tonight's Planning Committee agenda. And although registration prior to the meeting was encouraged, if you have not yet registered and you're watching tonight and wish to speak, please email cityclerks@barrie.ca or call 705-797-5353 and staff will send you the information required to participate in tonight's meeting. The public meeting is to review an application for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Baldwin Planning Development Consultants on behalf of Robert Gilroy, 821 Big Bay Point Road. It's in Ward 10. Members of Planning Committee will be listening to the presentations and any comments heard during the public meeting, but we won't be making comments or debating this item tonight. Members of Planning Committee will have the opportunity to provide comments when the staff report comes to Planning Committee for consideration at a later date. If you do wish notification of when the matter is going to come to committee for discussion, please email the Legislative Services Branch. And again, that's cityclerks, all one word, at barrie.ca. Okay, Ms. Banfield, Director of Development Services, could you confirm that notification was conducted in accordance with the Planning Act for the public meeting?
Yes, Mayor Lehman, it was.
Thank you very much. I'll call on Angela Baldwin, Baldwin Planning and Development Consultants, to provide the presentation concerning the application for zoning bylaw amendment, 821 Big Bay Point Road. Ms. Baldwin, welcome to Planning Committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor Lehman, members of committee. My name is Angela Baldwin. I'm a land use planner with Baldwin Planning and Development Consultants. And I'm here tonight to make a presentation for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 821 Big Bay Point Road. Now, can I just take over? I'm going to share the screen if you don't mind and bring up the presentation. Okay, can everyone see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Mr.
Okay.
Nolan will help.
This is always
Or
the
Mr.
tricky
Barbero.
moment. Or
Yep.
is it going to work? Can everyone see that now?
Still no.
Okay, I may have to.
Nope, there we go.
Oh, is it there now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Oh, we
That
can
was a
see
bit
it.
of
So you are good to
check
go.
moment. Thank you. So I'm just going to run through my presentation that was provided to the clerk's office in advance. So the first slide is just showing the location of the subject lands, which are on the south side of Big Bay Point Road in the inner shore planning area, being 821 Big Bay Point Road. The property itself, as outlined in red, has a frontage of 56 meters, or about 183 feet, a depth of about 128 meters, and an area of 0.75 hectares. Existing uses, there's just a shed and a garage on the property. It has frontage on both Big Bay Point Road and on Burkall Place. And surrounding uses include a commercial plaza to the east that goes over to Prince William Way, low and medium density residential to the south and west, Big Bay Point Road to the north, and Strathallan Woods further to the north. These are some air photos or images of the subject property. So the top left is looking to the north, being Big Bay Point Road. The second slide that is on the top right is looking south to Burkall Place. So it shows you can see the commercial property just to the top left. And then the subject lands are basically the image that is front on the slide. And then the other two are also looking towards Burkall Place. So just to show you the connection of the property with respect to the surrounding uses. So the official plan designation for the property, so as noted, it is in the Inner Shore planning area. The designation is residential, and the existing zoning on the property, as outlined in red, is single family residential R3 and multiple family dwelling RM2-TH. This is a copy of our proposed site plan. So essentially the application or the proposed development is for 30 townhouse units in 6 blocks, all two-story buildings with a proposed condominium tenure on a 6.4 meter wide road. And the proposed access would be full access from Burkall Drive, which is on the south side of the property, and then a right in and right out on Big Bay Point Road. So the development identifies rear yard amenity spaces for each unit, a common amenity space, 45 parking spaces, which is 1 per unit, and 15 in the visitor parking lot, including a barrier-free parking space. And then the setting itself is close to transit, shopping, parks, and schools. These are some images of the conceptual design. So we're working with McKnight Shuren Architects, and this is to show essentially the proposed design of the unit. So a bit of a traditional townhouse design. Our intent is to market the units to a seniors population. And so some of the features that we're proposing is the ability for some of the units to have an elevator shaft within to allow seniors to move to that second level easily, have less bedrooms on the upper level. And then that amenity space, our thought was we could do garden plots in there, or just make it a very low intensity sort of recreational leisure space. This is a chart identifying the proposed zoning parameters for the RM2 SP zone, and that's the proposed zone that we are hoping to be rezoned. So essentially, what we have is we comply with all of the parameters of the zoning bylaw with the exception of 3 minor amendments. And we are asking for a reduction in the front yard from 7 meters to 6 meters, a reduction in the rear yard from 7 meters to 6.49 meters. And that same reduction for the setback to a secondary means of access, which is really the rear patio door. So that's the same setback of 7 meters to 6.49 meters. But with respect to the other zoning parameters for the RM2 SP, we either meet or exceed, or we're below. Where there's a max, we're below, and where there's a minimum, we're exceeding the required standards. Oh, excuse me, my mistake. In support of the application, we have submitted a planning justification report, a functional servicing report, including stormwater management plan and water main analysis, a traffic impact study, a noise study, geotechnical report, tree inventory, preservation plan, and a hydrogeological study, and they're all being reviewed by staff. So in conclusion, the proposed bylaw amendment would facilitate the proposed development of 30 residential townhouses in a condominium setting and I apologize, it says 8 blocks, that should be 6 blocks, that's my mistake, with appropriate parking and amenity space being provided, townhouse units geared to seniors, and it optimizes the use of existing infrastructure supporting growth in a compact and efficient form. The subject lands are in an appropriate location for the proposed density in that they are designated residential, and the majority of the property is already zoned for residential townhouse development. So we need to get one zoning across the entire property. And then the proposed development conforms to and is consistent with the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the City of Barrie official plan. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. That completes my presentation. And I'm happy to address any questions. And I also have our traffic engineer with me, John Northcourt, and I have our civil engineer, Mike DeJean, as well, if we have questions. I'm not sure if Mike was able to log on, but we'll find out soon enough.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Baldwin. I did forget to, at the beginning, check in with the Director of Development Services to ensure that notification and confirm that notification was conducted in accordance with the Planning Act. So I'll do that now, Ms. Banfield. Lest anybody question whether notification was provided, was it?
It was.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will now actually call on Tiffany Thompson, who's a Manager of Growth and Development here at the city, to give us a status update on the application. Ms. Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman and members of Planning Committee. Further to Ms. Baldwin's presentation, be advised that planning staff are currently completing the technical review process associated with this application. A neighborhood meeting was held virtually on December 2nd, 2020. This meeting had 9 participants, the applicant, the development representative, Ward Councillor Mike McCann, and planning staff. Comments included at that meeting concerns regarding traffic impacts generated by the proposed development and confirmation on the proposed tenure and target market of the development. As Ms. Baldwin noted, staff received a revised concept plan on March 15th, 2021, and which did not change any of the requested special provisions, but did reduce the number of blocks from 8 to 6. The total number of proposed townhouse units is also remains at 30, which was part of the circulation. Staff are currently reviewing the appropriateness of the justification for the proposed amendment, and this includes potential impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, including traffic, access onto Burke Hall Place and Big Bay Point Road, along with servicing, and also the integration of the proposed development with the surrounding residential area. The detailed analysis of these matters will be brought forward in a planning report for the committee's consideration. Next steps will include staff will continue to work with the applicant and their consultant team to address any feedback received tonight, and also any comments received from our technical staff and agency partners. These items may require revisions or updates to the plans and reports that were submitted in support of the application. A staff report providing recommendation to the Planning Committee on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is anticipated to be brought forward in late spring 2021. All submission materials and key dates associated with this submission are available online under the city's proposed development webpage under Ward 10. Alternatively, you may contact the file manager, Dana Sutterby. Thank you, Mayor Lehman and members of the Planning Committee and the public. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those following the public's comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. If members of the public have not yet registered, if there are people watching who wish to speak at tonight's meeting, please email cityclerks@barrie.ca or call 797-5353 right away, not to sound like a limited time sales guy, but you do need to call right away because this is the opportunity for members of the public to speak. And I don't believe we had anybody register in advance. Madam Clerk, has anyone registered to speak at this public meeting?
Sorry, Norm Marilyn, no one's registered to speak prior to the meeting, and no one currently has registered to speak.
Okay, we will do any questions from the ward councillor under our procedure. The ward councillor can ask questions of clarification if he has any. So Councillor McCann, any questions for the presenter? No, all good. And I guess one question of procedure just around this one, because I was a bit confused. This one strikes me as almost not needing a rezoning. It's only, if I'm not mistaken, it's only that little portion at the north end of the property that's not zoned for what's being pursued here. Is that correct, Ms. Banfield? Is the reason this is in front of Planning Committee? I know there's some very small reductions to the yard sizes, but those would be Committee of Adjustment matters, I would have thought. Is this simply because the top 2 or 3 lots in the property are R3 and not RM2? So I guess Ms. Thompson could answer that.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. That'd be correct. There's a split zoning on the property, so
Okay.
there's a small portion of it that is in the R3 zone,
Which requires it to be. a
which
full
requires the
rezoning.
rezoning.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
correct.
Yeah, I looked at the presentation, was a bit surprised it was here. Okay, that explains it, and it also probably explains why there are so few comments or concerns from the public. So thank you, Ms. Thompson. Thank you, Ms. Baldwin. I'll check in with the clerk one more time. Did we have anybody call in to speak?
No, Mayor Lehman, we do not.
Okay, then with that, I will declare the public meeting concluded. Thank you to those who were here for this tonight. We can move on to our presentation, which is by Ms. Banfield, our Director of Development Services, and it is regarding affordable housing from 2018 to 2020 and related to the report that's a little bit later in our agenda. Ms. Banfield, the floor is yours.
I am also trying to share my screen here. There we go. Are we good?
Yep, we can see it. Oh, good.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here, Mayor Lehman, to talk about the affordable housing report to you and to Planning Committee that is on the agenda this evening. Talk a little bit about some highlights for you, talk a bit about what's affordable and why that's important, a bit about the story of second suites, and some actions for 2021. So 840 units certainly was always the number of targeted in the 2015 affordable housing strategy. And the report is showing that we actually have 872 new units since we started tracking in 2015. And so that's great. That is great. But if you take a look at those units, you do see quite a large number of second suites and unfunded second suites. And while it's fantastic that second suites have taken off across the municipality, the unfunded second suites, the difficulty with them, if we're truly trying to determine how affordable they are and for how long they're affordable, it just becomes a bit tricky. And the County of Simcoe recognizes that and has given us throughout the reporting period what we consider discount rates. And that discount rate has fluctuated since 2015. And most recently in 2020, the discount rate expanded to about 75%. So what that means is out of all the units that are second suites, the expectation is that 75% of them are not affordable. So if you take that affordability discount, if you will, and apply it throughout the entire reporting period, we'd be looking more at having 619 new units. Again, still great, still new units, but not necessarily the 872. And it's just important to note that. And I also want you all to know that units that are occupied are counted in this report, not the units that you would have seen recently or perhaps in the last couple of years that have gone to council that have had affordable housing components to it. Until people turn the key and start living there, we don't count them in the report. But we have also, as a municipality, to the tune of over $1.7 million through the CIP, contributed to affordable housing projects, including purpose-built rental. And when you take a look at the spectrum of affordable housing across not only the county and the city itself, it ties into affordability is just so important. So while there's some fantastic things to highlight, we still have more work to do. And it's tied really to what affordable means. So this is a provincial definition that we all use, and you've all seen it before. And it ties into what's affordable rental and what's affordable purchase, and two different ways to calculate that. And we always use the least amount. And one option is always to tie it to income, and one option is always to tie it to what's happening in your market. So what this means for the city of Barrie is, from the affordable rental perspective, the average market rent for a 1-bedroom is around that $11.90 mark. So that's less than what the median income, 30% of the median income, household income would be. So for the affordable rental, we consider the market rent. Whereas for purchase price, it's a bit different. Purchase price, if you use income, the lower number comes out. So $304,000 is something you would have seen in a lot of our staff reports. We don't have a new 2020 number yet. That does come from the county, and it'll be coming soon. But it's probably no surprise to everybody that that's going to be the lower number from an affordable purchase perspective. Even 10% below the average resale value in the municipality certainly is much higher than that income piece. And what that really shows is certainly that incomes are somewhat steady, whereas real estate prices and market prices are certainly increasing. And then I just wanted to remind you about the CIP definition that targets the projects in the CIP really for those hardest to house and sort of that lower income, the 40th percentile. So that's a bit different in terms of, it's not necessarily the official definition, but it's certainly how we direct our CIP funds. And again, all of this ties into kind of the unit breakdown and what we're really trying to achieve, which is more units, more affordable units. And so again, just to break down this little bit of story of the second suites, and you can see our 872 units broken down by type. And you can see the funded units are those that get funding from the County of Simcoe. And the affordability is confirmed, and it's committed for a period of at least 15 years. Whereas the unfunded second suites, again, are those units that we don't have a lot of control over, may have never been affordable in the first place, or certainly maybe don't become more affordable over time. And again, that affordability discount set by the county has fluctuated into the highest increase of just recently in 2020, and that's at 75%. So again, as I said at the beginning, if we actually did apply that 75% discount across the entire reporting period, our numbers would be closer to the 619 unit versus the 872. So really what that means is it's fantastic, because yes, we've got 619 units, but we actually still have the ability to try to get 221 more units, still required to meet that 840 target that we've all come to know. And so fundamentally, how do we get there? So the staff report proposes a couple of actions. I think fundamentally, there's no one action. Affordable housing is a complex matter, and there's no one response that's going to solve it all, or someone would have done it by now, quite frankly. So, one of the first things really is to be here tonight and reporting to you and the kind of the state of where we are. We're suggesting let's revisit that affordable housing strategy. The new task force, staff working with that community group and led by you, Mayor Lehman, along with some city initiated amendments to our zoning and some new policy direction coming out of our OP, as well as some research by staff on some best practices or what other jurisdictions are doing. We'd really like to explore a cash in lieu of affordable housing, and we want to report back to you on kind of how we think that can work. And as always, we have project approvals, the project work that we do with different affordable housing providers through the development approvals process. We're always happy to help them with the process, help them with their applications or any sort of grant opportunities, including kind of our own CIP. So this is all that I had for you tonight to highlight. I'm happy to answer questions, happy to hear thoughts, and I can't let this opportunity go without thanking our communications team. They always do such a fantastic job putting annual reports together and bringing data to life in a nice, meaningful way. So thanks very much for your attention, and I will stop sharing my screen and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. Questions for Ms. Banfield? Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thank you for the presentation. I did have a question. So in the report, you have the vacancy rate for rental properties. Do we have data, or is it possible to get data on vacancy in terms of homes, home ownership? Because I know this has been an issue in other communities where they found that vacant homes sit there for longer than 6 months, and it really, doesn't help contribute to the supply issue that we have. They're looking at vacant homes taxes, et cetera, to address that issue. Is that something we can find, or is that a labor-intensive process that maybe isn't possible?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of data that we can kind of pull that we have internally in terms of working with our finance department and even our water billing and those sorts of things. So I'm sure there's probably some way we can take a stab at looking at that.
Okay, yeah, and I guess a related but broader question, have we looked at if there are policy tools available to us to address housing speculation? The market's incredibly hot right now, and a lot of people are being locked out of the market, and I'm sure speculation is part of that problem. Is that something that we've looked at?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin, we haven't specifically at this point. Staff haven't, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. Ms. Banfield, in the recommendation that's before us tonight, in item number 2, there's one word that kind of bothers me or I wonder about it's qualifying affordable housing projects. What's the definition of qualifying?
Well, we would, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Riepma, I think ultimately what we were trying to tackle there was just making sure that it truly was an affordable housing project, that was going to house some of the hardest to house. We're trying to look at a way to qualify people as opposed to everybody saying, oh, my project's affordable, if that makes sense to you. So just trying to kind of truly make sure that it's a meaningful affordable housing project.
Okay, that satisfies me. I just want to be sure that it is truly an affordable project before we waive any fees. I have a couple of questions on second suites. And you showed in your chart that the county assumes that 75% of second suites that are unfunded are not affordable. But if you do, certainly in my experience in the East End, it seems to me that there are no second suites that are affordable. And when you do the numbers and you assume that any unit that is unfunded is also unaffordable or not affordable, your numbers are much lower again, right? So I came up with 463 units that we can really call affordable, and the rest are sort of an assumption that they are affordable. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Riepma, if you've taken off all of the unfunded units, then you're probably getting close to that, although don't ask me for the math. I think the reality is, and we talked a lot about this from a staff perspective in terms of how to present this, and the county does do their assumptions. We work very closely with the county to make sure our numbers align with them, and so I think the reality is just kind of us all agreeing on the fact that there's more that can be done, and how low we can go is just kind of one aspect of it, but we do try to align with the county, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But I think in actual practice, that 25% assumption is just that. It's an assumption. I wanted to ask you another question about, especially in Ward 1, around the college area. Just recently, we allowed second suites, and one of the thoughts there was that we would allow the second suites so that all the ones that were there already illegally and substandard would come forward and become legalized and be brought up to safety standards, etc. Do you have any numbers on how many of those second suites actually came forward?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. So certainly the last page of the staff report talks about how many new second suites so 2020, there were 9 new that were in the Georgian College neighborhood area. I would have to go back and confirm if those ones were new units or if they were retrofitted. The reality is the amendments to change the Georgian College neighborhood happened in January. And, you know, if you recall, staff had like a big communications plan, and we were going to do a big recruit and try to the amnesty period and all those sorts of things. And obviously with COVID, that really didn't happen. We weren't going into occupied buildings. We weren't doing a big push. So that didn't necessarily come to fruition in the way that that staff had planned.
Okay. And I guess the other part of that is, have you looked at all at the number of Airbnbs that we have in the city? Because those are taking away rental units and being used for vacation homes. Is there a way to get a handle on what numbers we're talking about in that kind of situation?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma, I would suspect looking through, we haven't done it, staff have not looked at it from that perspective. I would assume there is ways for us, much like I see Ms. Miller popped on, much like ways that we could look into the vacant housing. I think really what you're pointing out is that, and hope that the task force helps us with this, there's tons of things that we can look into and tons of kind of directions to kind of look and explore. And so it'd be great to be able to kind of laser focus some of those. But Ms. Miller, I don't know if you wanted to.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. Certainly through the MAT, through economic and creative development, we do have some links to that, and certainly those are some of the things that we can look at in combination with economic and creative development and development services in this next phase of work related to affordable housing.
Okay, I'm just curious as to sort of what the scale of that would be. I mean, is it worth pursuing, or is it not worth pursuing? And I guess my last question on this subject is the whole question of the boarding, lodging, and rooming houses. Those are truly, I suppose, the most affordable in our city. And the ones that we have licensed are licensed, but do you have any sense of how many unlicensed ones we have? It's an issue in Ward 1 for sure. It seems like we have many of them that are not licensed in any way.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. As always, it is tough to know how many are unregistered. We do have the current list of boarding, lodging, rooming houses, both large and small, that are registered on the city's website. And boarding, lodging, rooming houses were something that, again, staff, we did take a look at. It's not necessarily a reportable in the affordable housing strategy, so we didn't focus on that at this particular time. But again, it would be an avenue to explore in future for under this affordable housing umbrella, for sure.
Okay, and I guess my last question has to do with the accessory suites. And I see in your report that you're recommending that we take a look at those and see where we go with that. I guess the concern is that those suites are, or the potential for those suites are driving people, ordinary families, out of the market as opposed to creating affordable housing. So I just, do you have a sense of how many accessory suites we've had in the last, I don't know, a year or two?
So again, the appendix of the actual affordable housing report shows the second suites, new units registered by ward by year. So we have about 1,600 altogether registered, and you can see kind of the movement. 147 were registered in 2018, and again, this is just the appendix of the affordable housing report. So that's kind of our best estimate, and we continue to look at that and second suites, and that's what we're hoping to go out to a public meeting to hear about some of those matters.
Yeah, I guess I was interested in the quotation marks third suites particularly.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Reed. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Banfield. So I'm looking at slide 4 when we have the nice bar graph image that dissects different types of classifications of housing. And I was wondering if, when I look at the initiatives that we have, sometimes I view it more as all these great things that we've done to incentivize affordable housing, but over time, what are the real levers we have to actually hold that rental rate? And I was wondering if you could speak to a couple of pieces and clarify for me. When I look at the adjusted total of 619, my perception of it is that the rental supplement housing allowance and housing benefit, that 183 units that are really in the green, are really the only ones that have a structured process around a rent control. Would that be true versus the other ones might have been affordable from a incentivization of how it was built and the intention, but there's no control on the capping that rental rate to our formula for affordable housing?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, free market rental, you're correct. There aren't restrictions. If there are elements through like a CIP or some other element like that, there's different triggers that we can put in to try to continue that affordability. But the free market rent piece, other than what is prescribed by the provincial government, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. And follow up. I was really impressed with the strategy that staff brought forward, and I believe it applied more to incentivizing or supporting some of the front end costs around accessory suites. And that, I believe, was about a $45,000 or $50,000 grant that allowed per application, I think, a maximum of $5,000 for an individual looking to develop an accessory suite, so that detached third kind of rental property potential. And that was specific to cost for the water infrastructure, water delivery infrastructure. That's the only place that I saw the grant funding for that renovation expense tied to, I believe it was a 20-year requirement that the rental rate would stay within the parameters of the affordable rental formula at the time of the build. And I didn't know if that is correct, and please correct me if I've got anything wrong there, but that's the only thing I've seen as a policy or parameter to date where we've got a timeline that's attached to an accessory suite rental rate. And if that's seen to be effective, and if that is seen to be something that might be a go forward, or will be leveraged in that type of approach more broadly across different development opportunities.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, I believe you're talking about the water hookup, right, through, and that's through for the third suite. Certainly other second suites, I mean, certainly there's no development charges. There's lots of things that are tied to incentivize it, but in terms of kind of tying the affordable piece, unless it's funded through the county's project or again, captured for a detached suite through this program with the building department, the second suite affordability isn't tied to anything, right?
And then in follow-up, would that be something that was a proof of concept, and that type of requirement attachment to get grant funding to be able to hold the rental rate for 20 years at a particular level. Is that something that could be applied to other aspects when we talk about affordable housing builds and development? Or is it just unique to it being tied to the water, that situation specific to accessory suites? Because I thought it was a great idea. And I was wondering if that could be applied or is a policy application that's being looked at.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, it's my understanding that kind of previously trying to incentivize single second suites was something that the municipality thought was important, and then they did take off, if you will, kind of thing. And so then, with the exception of, as I said, this hookup or dealing with no development charges from that perspective, the new CIP really wanted to get more meaningful. So that's where you start seeing like where there's a minimum number of units. And so council can revisit that again, but the direction has kind of been to try to support some of the bigger projects, if you will. Even they don't necessarily have to be super huge, and some of the Redwood projects, as long as it's, I think it's 3 units, as long as it's more than that, we can start using the CIP. But the whole idea really of the CIP was to not allow these single units, because they did seem to be taking off. It's kind of like the incentivizing what's not happening on its own kind of thing. And so second suites were happening on their own. As we started allowing the third suites, we noticed this water hookup. So we did try to address that. But at this point, supporting single suite second suites isn't something that that staff have recommended, but certainly the task force may, or council certainly can have us look at that as well.
Okay. Thank you. And I think the rest of my questions apply more to the staff memo on the agenda. So I'll hold. Thank you.
Okay. Any other excuse me? Any other questions on the presentation, members committee? Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Maybe I'll, Council Elwin asked a question if city staff had any crystal ball on figuring out, what future house pricing was. And it's then Council Ritma, asked some follow-up questions about some data, and then Council Kungle asked some more questions about subsidized housing. And I'm just maybe curious here, maybe Michelle Banfield or maybe Michael Prowse could give me some light on how much staff time is designated to this general area. And I don't mind it being an email, but I'm just having a hard time with your questioning. And there's a real good movement that we're going to have between 500,000 and 1 million new Canadians coming to our province, and most of them are going to want new homes. And there's a shortage of supply, and it's just hitting me like a brick wall right now that there's great feel-good stories and there's great questionings that can get great newspaper clippings. And I'm just wondering that we're in some real good anomalies in time right now where house prices are soaring, especially in Barrie. I believe 30% year after year, and very good chance we'll go up another 30% this year. And we keep on asking our developers to put units that are subsidized, and I am just not understanding what we want and the realities that are going to happen in our foreseeable future. And I'd just like to maybe have council maybe have a real good in-depth conversation on where we want this to go over the next 12 months. So I'm just throwing out ideas. I'm not really asking specific questions, but I am just putting on my my business brain, and I'm separating my emotion, and I'm wondering, how much staff time is really designated to these questions, and what is the reality of these happening? And just because we want this to happen doesn't mean we're going to have development come forth. So I'm going to keep ambiguous because I'd like to get more information. I'm just not liking the trend of questioning that we're going on right now, because I don't want to see a lot of staff time being used up in this type of marketplace when really the unknown is huge. I mean, the market could go up another 20, 30%, and I just don't know what the impact would be on the subsidized housing. So maybe I could just have maybe an offline conversation with Michelle Banfield or with Andrea Miller or with Michael Prowse. But I'd like to throw that question out, see if there's any comments, and maybe cut some of the sizzle and really get to it, as we've only got 18 months left to council. And I'd like to see some real change happen and not a lot of talk. Thank you.
So, sorry, Councillor McCann, was there a question you wanted staff to answer? Was it how
No,
much time are they spending on this council priority?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I made myself pretty clear. You know, I wasn't really asking a direct question tonight, but I just wanted to throw a Hail Mary and just throw some concerns that I have with, you know, reality and with wants. You good?
Okay. Others wish to comment or questions? These were supposed to be questions on the presentation, but questions on the presentation? Okay, I just had one question, I guess, around the second suites. So staff were unable to determine, or well, I guess I should back up and ask the question, did you try and determine how many of the second suites were actually affordable? Because the county, I know, has changed they call it a discount rate, which is actually is something else in business, but the rate at which they discount the number of as being unaffordable. I mean, there should be some hard data on this. Go on Kijiji and check out how much the second suites are being listed for. Check rental listings through the online, through the Barrie District Association of Realtors. Have we not been able to get hard data on how many of these second suites are actually renting for affordable amounts?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, we don't have reliable data, and if it is, it's just a snapshot in time. Certainly, there's different, like as you said, you can lots of different resources, but whether or not it's actually going to meaningfully show how much is affordable or for how long, it's not readily available.
Yeah, and I know we had this problem a couple of years ago. I mean, you know, your presentation shows that basically we have a 10-year strategy with a target that we've all come to know because it's a nice round, you know, recognizable number of 840. We're, you know, somewhere between exceeding that target and falling a couple of hundred units short, but we don't actually know. And I think, first of all, it would be really good to know, because if we can track this going forward, we'll have a better sense of how well we're serving our residents. You know, by way of feedback to that second suite issue, and I guess to Councillor McCann's broader question, you know, RVH is now telling me that nurses can't afford housing in Barrie. So if there's any question as to why this is important, you know, purchasing a home is no longer possible for a nurse on a nurse's salary, at least early in his or her career. And, you know, and this is one of the reasons, even with the shift in built form, where we're starting to see more condos and more townhouses, you know, you showed those purchase prices. They are still out of range for a single person on a, you know, pretty solid income. So, you know, you've now got RVH personnel trying to team up to afford some form of rental housing, or maybe one of them is able to purchase it and the other's rent. And it's all indicative of the impact of a housing market that no longer meets the needs of lower and middle income households. And our employers are starting to get worried about it, our business community. So I think, you know, and that's a symptom of the run up in prices. And I actually think Councillor McCann's right, it is going to continue. So I guess my question to you is, that's way bigger than 200 second suites as a problem. And our housing strategy has traditionally targeted, you know, trying to create some more affordable units through various incentives. But the scale of the problem is way bigger than a municipal strategy can feasibly tackle. So is the purpose, I guess, of what comes next, your last slide there, you know, are we going to target the hardest to house and say we're going to try and help the people in deepest housing need? And then we're going to have to try and adjust market levers to fix the problem for the nurses and the manufacturing workers and the other people earning a decent salary but unable to afford to buy a house in Barrie or even a townhouse? Or do you focus? And one of the reasons I formed the task force is so that we can have a vehicle for you to help us create that focus for council by the end of the year. But in your next step slide, it sort of seems to suggest we can't keep doing another strategy like the last one, which kind of did a whole bunch of little things that got us. We actually did very well with it. We're probably going to achieve it well ahead of its time frame. But overall, look, rents have still gone up. So, and the problem's probably getting worse as the market rises. So any thoughts on how those next steps are going to look in terms of changes to the strategy? I know there's a bit about this in the staff report, but do you want to comment on that last slide?
Well, certainly, and I mean, it's almost the last slide in the first slide that talks about kind of those housing, that full range of housing. And again, I've spoken to different council members, and all the way from homelessness to at market purchase price, and the steps all in between there. And some are better suited to some of our affordable housing partners to kind of deliver, and then there's some that as a municipality we might have more impact on. And so I think it's about kind of finding our sweet spot, if you will, in terms of where we think we can make the most headway as a municipality and at the staff level. There certainly is stuff that we can do from a development services department perspective in terms of the approvals, and you would see some other recommendations in there. So there's that piece that we can do at a staff level. But ultimately, it is, I think, the task force and council themselves that need to kind of focus on what the next strategy or the next stages of the strategy, or where you actually want to focus. Because there's tons of, as vast as that expanse is, it's the same with the options for trying to address it.
So last question, in running these numbers, it struck me that looking forward and trying to do the next set of numbers, it would really help us to be able to understand how the developments that we have already approved are likely to impact the market. And you can't, who could have forecast the run up in housing prices we've seen right now? So it's not really about trying to forecast prices, because that's not the market we're talking about. We're talking about the rental market. Barrie has one of the lowest ratios in the entire country of rentals to ownership. And if we are going to have, rental supply constructed that's going to bring down average rents, we should be targeting that through planning policy. And I know we already do. I know our intensification policies by definition produce more purpose-built rental than our greenfield suburbs do, right? But how could we do that? Because that's the alarming thing. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the pad mapper data about a month ago, but we're only $100 a month behind Toronto now for a one-bedroom apartment. And I mean, Toronto's rental prices have collapsed because of the exodus, so maybe an unfair comparison. But we're only behind Toronto, Victoria, and Vancouver, and then Barrie. So I think the reality is our strategy has succeeded in creating the units, but we haven't moved the needle because the market's running way faster than we could possibly affect. So have we ever looked at we've approved now we've approved thousands of apartments in all of these substantial developments. Some are going to be condo, they're not going to affect the rental market, but like HIP developments and a few others are purpose-built rental. So have we ever asked somebody to look at, like an economist, to look at what that is likely to do to rents?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, the city has not. We have not. I know we've been in many meetings with people, I think ourselves, Mayor Lehman, where they come to us because they know there's the developers come to us because they know there is the market, and we certainly hear that time and time again. The reality is these large projects just do take a lot of time to get built and get off the ground. And you're right, there's tons in the pipeline, both for like dedicated affordable housing as well as rental housing. But it's just about getting them kind of built and occupied, that turnkey.
Yeah, it can take decades for sure. Okay, thanks. If there are no other questions on the presentation, I think we can move and with permission of members of Planning Committee, why don't we deal with this, the staff report right away, since we're just coming out of the discussion on it, and then we'll deal with the planning application. Okay, seeing no concerns. So the Affordable Housing Monitoring Report, Deputy Mayor Ward, you held it. Would you care to put it on the floor?
I will put it on the floor. I actually did have some questions on it.
Go
3
ahead.
questions to be exact. The first one would be the funds generated. This is on page 10, towards the bottom. It says funds generated from this could potentially be contributed to the CIP, Affordable Housing. I take it when you say reserves in that dedicated reserve fund, we already have a dedicated housing reserve fund, correct? Is that what you're talking about? Or is there setting up a new fund?
I'm actually, through you, Mayor, no, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. I was in this instance, we're referring to contributing to the CIP.
Okay.
Yeah, directly into the CIP and the portion that would be used to support affordable housing projects, and then would be divided up through the same process as the CIP in grant intakes and that evaluation piece.
Okay, and some of the comments earlier about how would we ensure it stays affordable housing, and I think the only way to assure it stays affordable housing is if we own it or we're directly subsidizing it. And I'm hoping that, you know, a lot of the money we're going to put into affordable housing might be for projects that we're going to own either through our municipal nonprofit housing or the county housing, because that, in my mind, is the only way to assure it stays affordable, is if we as a city or through the county own the project. That's just more of a comment than a question. My next question was on the tiny homes. Is there a standard, or do we have a definition of a tiny home or a micro suite? Because I keep seeing, it seems to be whatever anybody wants to call a tiny home is a tiny home. I've seen many definitions. Is there a standard one in the planning industry of what a tiny home is? Through
you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, in most instances, it's the minimum, the size according to the building code, and as a minimum dwelling unit. So I don't have that right in front of me, although it's that's ultimately one of the recommendations that we would want to bring forward to a public meeting, is to look at what a tiny home could be defined as, where they would be appropriate to be located. If there's any sort of special provisions we'd want to look at through that.
For example, the garden suites that we're starting to pop up in the city now, would those be tiny homes, or are those bigger than a tiny home?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward, some of them are quite large, to be not large necessarily, but they're not tiny. Okay. And my last question was, and I know you've heard this from me before because I made it in my comments on the new official plan. And something I think is an opportunity out there is to, I think we've often had it wrong in the past. We've required commercial in residential buildings, and I always thought that should be flipped. We should require residential in commercial buildings. And there's all kinds of strip plazas around the city, and very few of them have residential on the second and third floors. I mean, there's some by the college. I know there's some down off Big Bay Point Road by the water plant. But for the large part, we have dozens and dozens of these strip plazas around the city with nothing on the second floor. There's no second floor. And I think that's a real opportunity. I guess it's just a suggestion that in the future that I'd love to see it. If somebody's going to build a strip plaza, they have to put housing on the second floor, which is actually kind of an old-fashioned thing. I mean, people in the 40s and 50s, families often lived above commercial establishments. And I think we've lost that for some reason. You still see it in the downtown, but you don't see it around the city. And I think there's a real opportunity there to get a lot of housing. And I can almost guarantee that will end up being affordable in most cases. It's not going to be high-end housing. So just something maybe looking at something else to look at going forward. Thanks, that's it.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the Big Bay Point and I've forgotten where it is, Sandringham, I guess, between Big Bay Point and the water plant. That was a Hassey development. There's actually an apartment building behind the mixed use plaza with Sakana House and everything else and it has apartments above it. Then there's one in Councillor Harvey's ward that I've always thought was tremendous too. I think it's at Lougheed and Mapleview. It's got kind of a triangular architecture to the second floor. And it's very unusual because strip plazas aren't usually built like that. But both of those developers did those designs really well. And I think you're totally right. It's right in the middle of the community. It's very affordable. It's only 2 stories high. and flats over shops is how a lot of people found their first apartment. Anyway, others who wish to comment on the staff report. Councillor Thompson.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Ms. Banfield, really quick. Do you find as council we could maybe improve the affordable housing with different form builds? Councillor Jim Harris and I met with somebody involved in building houses and stuff when we were trying to find ways to bring people in to build affordable housing, like thinking out of the box. And a lot of the concerns they had is that we, sometimes council, like in public meetings, it's like they want beautiful, they want this, they don't want that, no back-to-backs, and which all comes with a price tag. So we're unable to build affordable housing, true affordable housing, with the restrictions we put in with the form build. Like you've seen like sea containers and and all that kind of stuff. Is there any talk to maybe looking at different form builds with just to try to keep pricing down? Is that do you find that we put some restrictions on our official plan, I guess, or building codes that are hindering us?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, certainly the more limitations that are, whether it's building material or whether it's building type, or once you start exploring the density, there definitely are limitations. But right now, really, it would be a great time to explore some of those options with, with the development industry, again, through the work of the task force, to kind of really see, what really does make a difference from an affordability perspective. And, what are things that, again, it just kind of goes back to meaningful contribution. And certainly the shift that Barrie has residentially from, more traditionally single detached homes. And we've seen the built form change over the years. And, initially, maybe even 5 or 10 years ago, that was enough to kind of nip away at and provide some affordability. And then again, we're seeing that that's long term. That's not the case. And now we need to do something else. And it just kind of flows into that. So definitely exploring, as I said, whether it's building materials, whether it's unit size, which whether it's as I said, that built form or how we build it, 100%, and working with the development industry and the development community is something that we should explore 100%.
Perfect. Maybe a follow-up, Mary Lehman. On to Deputy Mayor Ward's point, maybe when you're doing the report, you can maybe actually look into incentivize landlords to convert. Going forward, some of the commercial real estate might be in trouble where they might be able to build on top of existing strip malls, if we looked at a way to incentivize it and stuff. So if that's, just taken off of Deputy Mayor Ward's, maybe that's something else you could look into.
Thanks for that, Councillor Thompson. I think it is so likely that we're going to see some of the strip commercial properties, for example, on Bayfield Street, come back for, at the very least, residential development on their parking lots, if not conversion of some of the commercial space, or tear down some of it, like they did with Center Mall in Hamilton. I mean, or the Don Mills Center in Toronto, for that matter. I mean, the value of the land for residential is enormous, and I'm guessing we as a city would welcome it if it was well designed. I mean, it's right on a major transit route, building on top of food stores and all the sorts of things you need for intensification. Who else did I see? Councillor Owen, go on.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And thank you, Councillor Thompson, for that question about built form. And building off of that, made me think of the built form task force that the city had years ago. Have we looked at whether the recommendations from that task force have been fully implemented? Have we sort of followed up on that work?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin, I have not, but I can absolutely do that. Take a look and see.
I did see Ms. Miller pop up on the screen, so
If I can, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Aylwin, that question was asked previously of me when I was the Director of Planning and Building Services back in the day. And certainly we did take a look at it, and everything that was available to be implemented had been addressed. But certainly, I think as Ms. Banfield has tried to outline in this report, as staff, we feel we're at the time where we need to now do the next thing, and we need to tackle a new strategy, a new approach, and be bold in that, and see what else that we can do. But yes, my understanding is that everything that could be done has been done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, very good point, Councillor Aylwin. A great example is the back-to-back townhouses, which were not permitted in Barrie's planning regime, and we started permitting them. And now we've seen a whole bunch of them come forward, and the first of them be constructed. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Your Worship. And probably just a comment. I'm not sure if Steph would be able to answer this, but the conversation makes me think about past discussions in general, but also then what's the role of the city potentially. And so where would any type of awareness about what are our commercial assets? I think we had some conversations too about are there deficiencies around some of our assets that make it undesirable for individuals to kind of look at those places for their business, and are there any that would be easy to get on the market that then could be used as a lever? I'm not sure if that's got any place in that conversation, but it's something I'm wondering about, the scope of what are our assets as well from a commercial space or unused space.
Are you talking about parking lots, Councillor Kungle?
Parking lots, or I wasn't sure if there were also different areas that we were trying to either sell or rent out that weren't meeting some, that were deficient around kind of being marketable as opportunities. So I wasn't sure what our capital assets were, either in parking lots and conversions or in actual renovations to space, and whether those things are being looked at when we think about either attracting or options to fund.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor, promoted you or demoted you, Ms. Miller? I'm not sure. Ms. Miller, do you want to give us an update on how we are using city-owned lands and assets to support the affordable housing goal?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle. As it relates to parking lots, certainly that had been a strategy. It's currently on hold, but Economic and Creative Development was tasked with a number of other departments to look at that. Generally speaking, I will say that the report back is that they're generally too small to achieve the desired impact that was on the original approach. And with respect to other properties that might be available, there's certainly was some consideration, but not a wholesale assessment. And Ms. McAlpine can comment for you in terms of other buildings that we might have available.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Kungle. The city actually doesn't own many commercial buildings, and the ones that we do own currently, we are occupying, and we don't have vacant space in those. We actually lease space in some cases because we don't own sufficient facilities for our needs. Or it's more cost effective in some cases for us to lease than to own.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? I believe Deputy Mayor put the put the item on as printed. If none, I just had one before I call the question. And I think I really like the recommendations that are in here in terms of moving forward with the strategy. And of course, you know, the task force, part of the purpose of the task force is related to the strategy, but part of it is quite independent, which is sort of rationalizing the supportive housing and the subsidized housing projects that are being proposed or are underway by multiple parties in Barrie. We have charities, not-for-profits. We have a foundation that just got planning approval on Bayfield Street. And then, you know, the county and the city ourselves. And there's a, I think there's a need to sort of pull those things together. But the broader phase or strategy 2.0 that you've been sort of talking about with the next steps tonight and beginning the public engagement process, I think there's some good steps here. And I think committee's giving you some feedback on other areas of potential interest. The one I wanted to add to it is, I guess, call them church sites or faith sites. And the reason for that is, I mean, most of the ones that are no longer in use are churches. They're traditional Christian denominations by and large that have either consolidated or are no longer using their sites. And there are some where I'm aware that the diocese are actively looking for a future use of the site and or could intensify. And that's the other reality. I mean, we saw St. Mary's Catholic Church in Barrie built seniors housing, 3-story affordable seniors housing, probably 30 years ago on Teresa Street. That was a major benefit, and it continues to be a great little community for seniors to live in there. But so many of these properties are much larger than they need. Sometimes they've got big green lawns. Sometimes they've got big parking lots that even on a really good Sunday might not be full. And so they, I think, and they're right in the middle of communities, often near shops, services, schools, all those good things that that have traditionally made them a pillar of the community. So whether it's a partnership with the ongoing organizations, religious organizations that hold those sites, or whether it's divesting so that somebody else could build, I think that's a big potential. But again, this is on the the subsidized or NFP or charitable side of the spectrum. So it's probably less of a necessarily a planning policy issue, although maybe it's about zoning, because I don't think the I zoning that many of those sites have would necessarily permit maximization of the site for housing purposes, maybe for specific institutional housing, but maybe not for residential housing. So that would be the one sort of piece I would want to add and hear back on in terms of the existing urban area. But I think the broader comment I'd make on the staff report, and I'll support it, certainly what's on the floor tonight, because I think it's a great next step. I think our task force has a very clear goal, which is to come back to council with an action plan by the end of the year for some of the next steps, particularly on the goal of ending homelessness. And I think we can work back and forth with staff on the next steps for the broader strategy. But I think we're going to need to be even more ambitious with the strategy, especially in terms of encouraging the market to build purpose-built rental to the point where it actually starts to bring rent down. Because at the scale we're doing it, we're not going to touch the needle. I think at the scale we're working now, we have a decent chance, if the projects go through and happen, of ending chronic homelessness, or at least having enough units to end chronic homelessness. However, that problem of the nurse that can't afford to live in Barrie anymore, or the manufacturing workers who have to commute from Midland, is going to get worse. And I think we're going to need some really carefully considered planning policies with a whole bunch of different built forms to make up the kind of numbers we need. We need thousands of rental units to actually start bringing down the average rent. So with that, I'll call the question. The motion's on the floor as printed. Those in favor, please indicate. Is anyone opposed? None. That's carried unanimously by committee. Last item on the agenda is we'll just go back one, which is the application for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 180 and 190 Ferndale, 59, 61 Sprull, and part of block 183. Councillor Thompson, it's your ward, and you held the item.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. I'll put the item on the floor. It's more about a comment and stuff. Just some of the residents are a little bit concerned. There's been a little bit of a delay from the public meeting to the report at no fault of staff. It was through the conservation and just working with the developer. And there was some concern about the traffic that this development could And I would just like to see, and I'm not asking for the site plan to be moved to council, but if they could look at a transition from the existing subdivision to the new, with maybe like road design in the subdivision planning side of it, like a roundabout or something more engineered, to alleviate the traffic. And anything on Ferndale will be addressed with all the other studies. So it was more of a comment just for the residents watching and concerned.
Thanks very much, Councillor Thompson. And yeah, I know the exit from the subdivision and connection through to Ferndale is both long awaited and a cause for concern. And I know you've been working on that one. Did you want any more information from staff, or are you good with the item as is printed right now?
Thanks, Mayor Lehman, for that. Yeah, I'm good. I've spoke with Ms. Banfield this afternoon, and but yeah, I'm not looking to move anything up to council, and we can let the professionals deal with it. And just if that could just be in the thought process.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the item is on the floor as printed. I'll call the question unless there's further comments. Okay, those in favor of the item, please indicate. Anybody opposed to this one? None. That carries as well. Thank you, members of committee. We're at inquiries. Deputy Mayor Ward, any inquiries of staff?
No, I have none.
Members of planning committee, any inquiries on planning matters? Okay, seeing none, thank you all for the meeting tonight. Thank you to staff for the presentation and the discussion on one of our key priorities. The meeting's adjourned, and we will see you next month.